Okay, welcome. Welcome to the second lecture of the week. Don't get used to it. Thanks for coming out on a Friday evening. I know it's a difficult time, but you'll be very happy that you came on Friday. First, we'll have one quick announcement by Allie.
Hi guys, we just have two quick fresh meet announcements. The first being a call for submissions. It's posted around the building. It's the how-to diagram. There's another one that's another call for submissions that's going to be coming out in the next week or two. So keep your eyes out for that. You can see it on freshmeetjournal.org or on the postings around school. And then the second is, of course, the other flyer that you've been seeing for the Fresh Meet party tonight at the Fresh Meet Mansion, also known as Julie's Courtyard. So come out tonight, give us some money, your support.
The Fresh Meat Mansion, that's great. It's only been around like a year and a half, and you have a mansion. Again, thanks for coming. It's a great pleasure this evening to be able to welcome one of the real originals in architectural culture and thinking to UIC, Lars Lerup, Professor and Dean Emeritus at Rice University. After Lars' early education in Sweden, where he was born, Lars received a BA from UC, University of California, Berkeley, a master's from Harvard, and then returned to Berkeley to teach. In 1993, Lars was named Professor and Dean at the UIC School of Architecture, where he instigated and inspired one of the most important international architecture programs for 15 years. After stepping down as Dean in 2009, Lars was named a Fellow at the American Academy in Rome, where I expect he will show us some of the things that he was working on there this past year. His many publications include Planned Assaults from 1987, which was one of the earliest and still most significant and perhaps most importantly effortless mixings of the thought of Michel Foucault with architectural design propositions and provocations. And maybe this is indicative of the subtitle. In 2000, Lars published After the City, which included his canonic essay Stim und Dross, which had been published 5 years earlier in Assemblage, and really also set a wave of reverberation in terms of how urban research was being conducted now since then. In some ways, that book, After the City, and the essay summarize Lars' most well-known contributions to contemporary thought on the city, particularly the way in which nature and culture are persistently activated and rearranged in the metropolis. And it's exactly that mix of the artificial or the plastic and the so-called natural or environmental, which is central to much of the work also happening in the school and to which we are indebted to Lars. Like Rainer Banham, you could say Lars is a historian of the city's immediate future. As one sees throughout the thinking about America, it often takes someone born elsewhere in order to unfold the possibilities of America to itself. And Lars has done that beautifully with his generative reflections on what he calls the suburban metropolis of Houston. Indeed, Lars has given us a new set of concepts and graphic strategies to describe this new situation, a landscape of what he calls megashapes, field rooms, optic pouches, zoohemic canopies, and of course, Stim Dross itself, which is really the first major rethinking of what had been the old Cornell School framework of figure ground. I think we are now all Stim Dross people and no longer figure ground people. As Dean at Rice for an extraordinary 15 years, Lars designed the school as a model of the open city he has always been a proponent of, setting it up with a cast of characters who have set the terms of discussion on the city in recent years. Many of these Lerupians, Lerupites, have passed through here for lectures. Albert Pope, Sanford Quinter, Mark Womble, Don Finley, Jason Payne, and we are also fortunate to have several others on the faculty, David Brown, Sean Lally, and Marina Nicollier, to name a few. Whether we know it or not, we are all indebted to Lars and his generosity of spirit for helping us through the lean years. I mean intellectually lean years, not just financially lean years. He invited us into his open city and encouraged us to go further sometimes than we thought was reasonable, and chastised us whenever we would stop moving forward fast enough. And most importantly, Lars was able to hold this fragile international community together by never remaining still himself. I think Lars may well be the character in contemporary architecture who most deserves a film made after him, and And in my fantasy version of this film, Peter O'Toole plays Lars, the foreigner who goes to Texas. He's too old. The young Peter O'Toole plays Lars, the foreigner who goes to Texas to save it from itself. So please join me in welcoming our Lars of Suburbia.
It's always scary to hear about yourself when you get to be around as long as I have. Because you realize that, yes, you did lots of wonderful things, but can we ever measure up to that? Is this the decline? Is it going to be terrible today? Am I going to fail again, like I've been so many times? And I hope not. Especially since today, I'm going to show part of myself, which is another side than many of the things that Bob talked about. And thank you very much. That was very kind of you, Bob. Untrue but kind. That it will show my disloyalty to architecture and my deep problems with it. This building, to me, is a great liberation because there are lots of cracks in which the light can come in. And I'm thinking about the Cohen song. Everything has a crack. That's how the light comes in. There are many ways to escape. You have at least two ways out here. So if you get bored, you can slip out. Just do it so I don't see it, because that makes me upset. There must be leaks and cracks in everything. Otherwise, there's no way we can get around and achieve some kind of liberty. And ultimately, that is probably what I'm most interested in. Today, I will talk about something quite different than I usually talk about. It's a project that I did as a very lucky, happy fellow at the American Academy. If you ever have a chance to go there, it's paradise. Great food and wonderful colleagues. And a really wonderful time to think freely for a whole year. Marvelous thing to do. Lots of young people have a chance to do that. Me and Grandma Moses were the oldest fellows ever at the town, which are probably alike. Today I'm going to talk about PHOBOS, which is Greek for phobia. The complexities around architecture's influence on persons, customs, habits, and productive endeavors are heating up. In my own career, the question of architecture's influence has remained largely and frustratingly unanswered, and not for lack of trying. In my case, it began with functionalism, form follows function, that rapidly slipped into behaviorism, humans follow form, where its practitioners believed that they could decide to make people behave. As the case was with the late Oscar Newman, who invented a veritable industry around defensible space. And although my cohort and I made fun of him, he may have been almost right. The reason for this reversal of architecture's influence on everyday life is complex and still far from direct bearing on architectural practice. For me, it began early 1970s in discussion with the Berkeley sociologist Russ Ellis, who flatly refused to believe that architecture's influence was ever more than 5%. On some level, this was devastating to me, but it may also have led me to pursue a career in the discipline rather than the profession. The undoing of the 5% rule began with my encounter with Foucault and his panopticism somewhere around 1972. And he really changed my life, and despite his untimely death, his ideas have remained deep in my everyday consciousness and work. In the long stretch from Foucault to present-day neurobiology, the plot has thickened considerably. Not that we have come so much closer to a definite answer to the original question, but it has opened a vista and given us a direction that may prove rewarding and consequential for a revised view of our practice and discipline. Everyday life, the part of culture that is dominated by endless regimes, largely in the image of Fordism, is dominated by gaggles of apparatuses that produce assembly lines, hierarchical organization systems, traffic patterns, work schedules, and computer operating systems. In turn, they're all housed with rectilinear architectural confines conceived by architects and systems designers. Deep below all of these apparatuses lie an intent to produce what Foucault calls docile bodies or docile subjects, to foster behavioral restrictions, using in the case of architecture compartmentalization, stability, linearity, predictability, fundamental tenets of a mature disciplinary society. Architects have avoided the embarrassment of facing this collusion with power by stripping architecture of everything but form. Yet, when looking closely at Foucault's definition of the dispositif, of the apparatus, back to his teacher Hippolyte that talked about the positivity of the historical element. For example, when suddenly in France we started to build madhouses and prisons, because suddenly there was a definition, and in fact the mad were invented at one time and put in prisons. There were suddenly too many. Because when I grew up in the 40s, of course, in Sweden, we had several people that would be considered crazy. They were part of our environment. They were not, it was not necessary to put them in prison. In a large city like Paris, this occurred, of course. So that is that particular historical element that each generation has. It's something that gets invented and put upon us in order to organize our lives, in order to produce docile subjects. Architecture cannot escape responsibility, however, taking a prominent position in the thoroughly heterogeneous set of elements of the apparatus that Foucault lays out. Discourses, conversations, philosophies, institutions, regulatory decisions, architectural forms, philosophical, moral, and philanthropic propositions, the said as much as the unsaid. I don't have time to explore this at length. Suffice it to say, all these apparatus, be it in a mobile phone or a design of a corporation office, or as Giorgio Agamben suggests, language itself, attempts to subjectify each person that comes under its spell. It is in this network of forces that I cast PHOBOS. But first, a return to the original quandary. And here is where neural selectionism has lots to say. I rely primarily on one informant here, the prominent neuroscientist Gerald Edelman in San Diego. My reading, listening to him, is crude at best, like it always was of Foucault. All I can hope for is that they're not in this room. The first local connectivity between neurons takes place in the intimacy of domesticity, people's growing, essentially. And if successful, the result ends up with gestation in the womb. Peter Sloterdijk, the German philosopher, calls this Urethraum, the first space, although the first actual space is really between the mother and the child. Importantly, this suggests that the developing brain evolves not just by itself, but always in a series of specific environments, all with distinct and specific consequences for the architecture of the brain. And by the way, no brain is the same. Each phase is an emergence. In fact, it knows little about its future. Even the emerging child has a stump, and it doesn't know whether it's going to be a hand or a foot. In other words, it's always emergence. For us, here's the most interesting aspect of the development of the brain, is that it continues until it dies, affected by what Edelman calls experiential selection. In other words, our neurons are constantly worked upon in the environment we live, which give a chance to architecture. This type of selection does not result from differential reproduction rights, but as a result of differential amplification of certain synaptic populations. So if one synaptic population is architecture, that gives us a chance to have some effect upon who we are. We always somehow knew this. We weren't able to really put our finger on it. We have no clue whether it's 5, 10, 15, and probably different in every minor percentage. That was a good sentence. So the millions of environmental experiences we encounter is one such synaptic population for which architecture is a subset. This gives architectural experience a new credibility that in the long run may help us old-fashioned scientific statement of what is architecture's value, undoubtedly very helpful in the everyday life of the profession. The project I will describe now takes this knowledge for a ride. Let me begin with an event that happened 1,500 years ago in the city of Rome, and I will read an excerpt from the Liber Pontificalis, the history of the popes. Erat, I'm going to read it in Latin. Erat in Roma civitate unum templum mirabile et rotundum. There was in the city of Rome a wondrous round temple in which the devil was sitting in his throne and forced his servants to render him an account of their fraudulent ministry. May we assume that he sits in the center of the rotunda, surrounded by his ministries, each occupying a niche on the periphery, and outside the Romans are terrified, even avoiding passing by the temple at noon. Herein is Pope Boniface, or Bonifatius, 608 to 615, after the death of Christ, urges Emperor Phocas to allow the papacy to assume power over the temple. Rewarded, Boniface in turn urges the Romans to celebrate with a fast for 3 days. When over, the barefoot Venerabilis Papa, carrying a cross, proceeded with an entourage of clergy and lay people to the piazza in front of the temple. Oh, sorry. No, that's so word. Okay. In front of the temple, under the broad portico, in front of the door, chanting, "Lord have mercy," he hears a terrible stir, the vexing of the demons, firm in his faith. As you notice, I am not photographed where he stood. You know why? Because it's full of tourists. The tourists are killing architecture, are killing the Romans, are killing buses they come with. They line up places like San Gimignano, a veritable shopping center, surrounded by buses and invaded by tourists that take lots of pictures. They never look at the thing more than through and at home in Ohio somewhere. I guess they look at it. And they steal images from architecture. It will eventually be depleted, so we can't see them unless it's a picture. And this is the danger of this apparatus. So it is an apparatus that subjectifies us in a certain way. So he prays, "Lord have mercy," and he hears this terrible stir, the vexing of demons. Firm in his faith, he assures his followers that the devil and his lackeys will no longer occupy the temple. Hearing this solemn oath, the devil and the other demons levitate, and in a fierce vortex is cast out through the aperture in the dome. Et sic confractum permanentusque infine, and thus it shall remain broken to the end. That's why the hole in the Pantheon will always be there, just so the devil can get out. The problem is that somebody can come in. So my argument is that all our phobias, like claustrophobia, agoraphobia, acrophobia, they came back now, and they are inhabiting our souls. I'm a claustrophobic myself. I know what it feels like. It's extremely upsetting, and that is the redistribution of the devil in us. Be prepared. Upon the dramatic departure of the demons, the great bronze doors open, sudden light, and the Pope enters and assumes power, claiming residency in the Church of the Martyrs. And since martyrs have been replaced with demons, the temple is renamed Santa Maria in Martiri, also known as the Pantheon. Now, as a reminder, weather permitting, the sunbeam in its mode scribes the inside of the new church day in and day out. The confractus, the broken and the irregular, remain so to allow both entry and exit, both in and out, both eye and anus, light and dark. Although so profoundly real, the aperture's meaning remains enigmatic forever. And that is actual architecture. As the history, the Liber Pontificalis of the Pope's claims, driven out through the forever gaping aperture, the devil is gone, But as we know, the eternal returns transfigured and displaced. Faceless, out of body, he is now just fear, phobia, phobos, in the cavities of the walls, claustrophobia, through the dizzying drop of the aperture, acrophobia, in the strangling concavity of the spherical prism, in the vast loneliness of the piazza, agoraphobia. It is in this pollution of material intent that we have come to defeat, not through some imperial strategy. Here Pope Bonifacius failed, but through humble tactics, using confession, craft, and stealth. In the end, phobia cannot be defeated, only diverted. So, I'm sorry I have to read a little bit more, but then I will do my usual thing. Pantheon stands at the edge of its piazza, its hulking mass unfaced, while the world around it rushes by. And here I have to intersect Bataille and Foucault. So Bataille's prison derives from the ostentatious, spectacular architecture. He wrote extensively on architecture, and there is a very nice book called Against Architecture by a guy named Monnier that I rely very much on, and it's a wonderful book if you ever want to know something about the limitations of our craft. You should look at that. In architecture, is seen, whereas Foucault's prison is the embodiment of an architect that sees, observes, and studies vigilant architecture. So these two together, one in which the architecture looks back at the subject, and the other when the subject looks in awe at the building. This kind of architect, we design the world designs us. That particular ambiguity is what interests me a lot. Because there is no real answer to this question. It's almost like a tennis match. And it will never get to an end. But Bataille's architecture, convex, frontal, extrovert, an architecture that is extremely imposing, shares practically no element with Foucault, with its insinuating concavity that surrounds, frames, and contains, and confines for therapeutic or disciplinary ends. Both are equally effective. But one works because it draws attention to itself, and the other because it does not. One represses, imposes silence, the other expresses, make one talk. So out there in the original agora, you can have agoraphobia. You can't have agoraphobia at too many damn tourists. So you have rather claustrophobia in the plaza. It's been radically cut. This was a time when Pantheon had a little more presence. Claustrophobia you can have in Pantheon in the thickness of the wall. You can actually enter in that space in between the inner wall and the outer wall, and you can be claustrophobic. I've been there once. You can also be ensnared, and there is where Foucault, the panopticon comes in, because I will argue that Pantheon is the original panopticon. There it is. You can't see the whole, but it's up there at the top. There it is. The old will always remain open. And panopticon, as I say, is the original panopticon. Now, much more subtle, of course, because it's that light beam, and light is both, it's fundamental for us to see. It's that crack that Cohen sings about. That everything has a crack in order for the light to come in. But this light can both be benign and help us with visibility, but it can also chase us, guard us, look at us, just like the tower in the original panopticon. So this kind of duality is the nature of architecture. It can both give and take. Suddenly I'm in a stream, but now my piazza is pulsating with ancient muddy waters. The crowds are gone. The piazza is vast and cold, and I can hear the Tiber rising. The ancient culprits, the devil in his ministries, confused and reconfigured. Bataille's phobia tinged with hate, Foucault already inside with his own synthetic dreads, agoraphobia, claustrophobia, acrophobia, all held in circulation by hysterical vertigo under the menacing bucco in the dome. And Freud, now in a train around the bend, tackling his own Roman phobia, the return of the repressed. I must escape. Ostensibly, I too have come to let my culture play, a la Johann Huizinga, returning after many years of absence to cut loose the hard-won strands of my perceptions, to let go of the few frozen music that forms my world. Yet I am starved, a vagrant rummaging for more of my own story, not to verify or to find anew its origins by carefully sorting among Vitruvius and Abelourget's primitive huts, Hegel's temple, Luce's tomb, Echo's cave, Bataille's and Foucault's prisons, or Sloterdijk's womb. Instead, I want to attack architecture's refusal to speak, its terror, just as it stands today. It is in this insinuating silence that phobias hide. So this is the proposition. Now, let's play. The mode, like the searchlight, is always looking for you. And if you stand in Pamplona, which you can do occasionally, and look up, you see it wander across. And sometimes when it snows, it comes in, we had a big snowstorm. Or when it rains. And then you understand things like the impluvium in the Roman villas, or a peristyle, that they are architectural apparatuses. They are not like a floor plan. They have a machinery attached to them that produces whole cultures. And this is very, very important for us to understand, I think, because we have relied on too much of behavioral impingements on architecture, and not on architecture's own brain, its own intelligence. And we have to rediscover it if we're going to have a way out, or making some kind of autonomous discipline that can give us a new freedom, a new liberty, that makes cracks in the apparatuses that society produces in order to make us docile subjects. Here they are, packs of them, and I'm one of them. It's not that I can escape. You can get a picture taken by this very tedious guy. He's looking at the side, I don't know what he's looking for, and send it to your aunt in Poughkeepsie. Here they are. And look, nobody's looking at the temple. They're looking at each other. Because obviously this was just on an itinerary. You have to see a pamphlet and say, can you draw it for me? Well, I pictured it. Everyday life invests itself by poaching in endless, countless way on the property of others. I'm building up to rebellion. Michel de Certeau, the practice of everyday life, he describes how people steal from the apparatuses in order to gain some freedom. As a dean, I always walked rapidly into my staff's office, and they were all on the internet doing things that had absolutely no relevance to our operation. I never said anything. I never said anything. Because that was the crack that was necessary. Fundamental. Those who oppress those who try to mend those cracks are the real villains. They're easy to find. The guy there in front, this is now the work area, which consists of lots of drawings by hand. I don't know if you know what that is, but remember, piece of paper, whatever you find, kind of music. And in this case, I use also photographs that I insert just to kind of make people feel like they're at home. Acephalus, the man that's always lost his head. He's probably a self-portrait right there in front. But the tiger is rising. Profanation, which is something that I learned from Agamben. Agamben is a wonderful Italian philosopher. He hates the cell phone, by the way, because he thinks it subjectivizes. He says we have to profane the machineries that control us. So we avert our phobias by a series of tactics using ways of resistance. This is actually a Finnish part of, what's his name, that liberated Italy for a while. It was part of it. You know, I have the beginning of some device, so I don't remember names even if I know them really well. And this name I know really well, and it comes to me when I don't need it anymore. So somebody put blue paint on this guy, and I couldn't. It's gone now, by the way. It began in the realm of a disciplinary society. I began to notice hundreds of professionals found in every church throughout the city. I'm not a Catholic, by the way. So I looked at these things with an objective eye. And they were either, this is a kind of relatively old-fashioned one, where you're totally exposed to the community that sits around you. The preacher is in there, he has the father is in there, he covers himself, and you whisper your sins into that screen. Here's another version of it. And this is the modern version, which is like a telephone book. You go in that nobody can see, because we have disappeared, we have become eyes. We are only individuals. In this, we have the mass and it's us, and we are always somehow by ourselves. American males know that very well. And when you're in there confessing, the light comes on, and the priest is there, and I'm not sure whether he has to be there. The light is on, because after all, this is a disciplinary situation. And what happens here, says Agamben, is that you come a sinning subject, and you walk in there, you confess, the Father lets you go, and you can go home and do your thing. But what happens is that you lost the earlier subject, and out comes a new subject. You have been desubjectified, and now you have to start your life until you sin again, and then maybe you get back to where you once were, but this sort of exercise of desubjectification is very unsettling because it decenters us. Just like all these devices, like this PowerPoint, it decenters us. So we have become more and more decentered, much harder to be in place. Think of this at home, where people spend most of the time on the internet. They're never at home. They're on the internet. They're out there and they don't know really where they are. There's no place there. So we are continuously affected by these apparatuses that maladjust us. Somewhere between confession and the talking cure. In light of the current controversies around pedophilia, I began to recognize the presence of 1,000 years of sins, a sinless discourse. So we go from confession to exchange, which is a new set of confessionals that are designed, and then the talking cure, which is a Freudian device that I will develop a little later on. The new confession. It came out of the sharp logic of boxes and the fuzzy logic of our intellect. And of course the sack of lies, the strange sack of logic of sacks. Lie? Yes, I lie. That's an L. There's a whole sinner's discourse. All the sins that I've committed for thousands of years are embedded in these, in the form of and all the time. Where do you sin? All the time. Narcissism, in the end. Confess eventually, which of course is the Foucauldian enterprise in the disciplinary society. Confess your sins. So this idea of confession, of defying confession, becomes very important. So thousands of years of disciplined sins. Talking cure. The modified David, they understand and the seat of Freud, taking into account his Roman and trained phobias. turns out that Foucault had a phobia about Rome, and he had a phobia about getting on trains. But eventually he made it and got to Rome, so I used that. And of course, there are lots of controversies. This is some of the furniture that I have designed over the years. And that particular chaise longue there, which is made out of aluminum, thin plywood, naugahyde, and plastic wheels. I take that, and I add a chair to the front. And this is a process of doing this, in which Freud can sit. So you can roll this thing around, you can lay there and speak about your problems, and Freud sits in the front, and you can be rolled around and take care of Freud's phobias. That's the talk of the sack of life, paintings and drawings. Does this array really end with talking to you? Or is the extension now in the form of blogs and Twitters just another reflection of our desperate need to confess? Have you seen so much confession on the internet? Why is that? What is it with us? Are we always trying to run away from ourselves and get subjectified so we can become new and fresh? This is how we do it. So somewhere between waterboarding and the ship of fools. Waterboarding was another interesting one. Another controversy around torture related to Foucault and the ship of fools. Because in the Middle Ages, they sent people out at sea. Presumably the bobbing of the sea would make mad people wonderful again. And I thought the other extension of this is, of course, waterboarding, when you want to make people better too. So we have waterboarding, that's criminality, whatever that is. You drown people and you get them out just before they're dead. The water table is my invention, which is a zero balance kind of rest. It's like a nice full waterbed. And then on the other side is the ship of fools that takes care of through the rocking of madness. This is celebrating Epiphany in Russia. You chop a big hole in the ice and you lay there for a while until you're almost dead, and then you come up and you feel much better. So this is the water table. See the guy laying there, and this will take care of it. So all of these devices are escapes, profanations of the phobias. So you can lay in there and have a nice time. And it's sort of an infinite pool because it spills out on the floor all the time. Tide is rising. And I'm in the process of working with a German composer to make an opera out of this, called PHOBOS, of course. And these are the beginnings of the stage sets. And his first opera is being opening in Berlin in October. And he works with the new Barenborn. And we're going to continue this presumably. So there are other ways of avoiding phobias through cooperation, friendship, and intersubjectivity. Cooperation is working together, something that we have almost forgotten. Working together is absolutely fundamental, particularly in our profession. We have all these stars, and in fact we know that behind them all is a team that produces what they do. So this is a machine that you crawl into backwards and you roll it towards the Pantheon without seeing it. And this, of course, will help your bataiphobia or agoraphobia. And they 3 or 4 or 5 guys get together and do this. And this came about in the air to China, air sick bag transformed. And eventually you reach Pantheon and you can slip in. And of course you won't escape the phobias because there's Foucault. And it's called the controphobia law. It's a law. Consensus, being in the same place and time, that's friendship. Here is Peter and Paul. You can see how they are close together, face to face, just before they're going to be taken off and destroyed. And the evil Romans are surrounding them. And this is true friendship. This is not intersubjectivity. This is actually friendship. And you can see here the Pantheon with its, now it's benign, the light between the faces between these two men in this painting by Sarah Lee shows real friendship, that which is so hard to find. And this chair, seen us is denied consent. It is to be. This chair in which you can bend so you can sit close face to face. It's an old chair and we've seen it in many versions. Since French is sort of a little bit cheesy, it's actually kind of a French cheese. And they look at each other really closely. And this is what we need in this world of focus. We need friendship. We need consensus. We need to be in the same place, in the same mind, in order to understand who we are. Then there is intersubjectivity, putting yourself in the shoes of others, which is extremely important too. How can we actually run schools without being intersubjective? How can we cope with each other without being intersubjective? And this is a mirror at top and opening at the bottom. And if you end up where somebody on the other side, you have your own torso and their legs. And in the other version, you have your legs and their torso. This is a demonstration of intersubjectivity. And then there are a bunch of outliers. I don't really know where they're there. There's myself, the acephalus. There's Lupa. Lupa, of course, is the she-wolf that nurtured Romulus and Remus. Romulus killed Remus, and it has always been considered a great crime. If you read Machiavelli, Machiavelli said that that was a necessity. You should never judge decisions of that magnitude with morality, only with history. And in the long run, it built the Roman Empire. Therefore, it was good. Broken bodies you see all over Rome, with metal pieces holding them together. It reminds me of Crash by Ballard. Ballard died for a couple of months ago. Cancer. In memoriam, that's Acephalus' body. His head is gone. There's Acephalus again. And the Lupa. Began with the champagne cork. You find all these wonderful little souvenirs in souvenir shops. And the she-wolf always looks very, very aggressively out in the world because she is protecting her two children. The fact that then one kills the other shows the complexity of our interactions as human beings. And this is a mosaic from part of the fascist developments. Some of the best architecture in Rome was designed under the fascists. Another confusing, difficult thing today. Is there fascist architecture? Not really, they're only fascists. Since we can involve architecture in an apparatus that is fascistic, architecture becomes fascist, but then the next day it becomes a wonderful place to dance. So that is again architecture's silence. How can we make it speak? We make it speak by making it part of apparatuses. And this we have to understand as architects, that we are part of this machinery that produces a form of terror every day. These guys wear all shells that sit on churches. You can wear them as a cape, as a hat, or as a leg thing. This is the only true monument in Rome because that's for everyone, the umbrella trees. There's always the return of the oppressed. This is the
return to use?
Oh,
At some
yeah.
point?
Oh, of course. I didn't use it. I lived in two places. I lived in San Juan and Puerto Rico, and I didn't use it. So no, I teach it. I am now a regular bloke. And I'm no longer the William Wood Watkins professor. It says that I'm the Smith professor. Yeah, that's cool. I'm Smith. This is Smith.
It seems like that Rome had a lot of impact on your way of thinking about architecture. What would you now look at using in different ways?
I guess that's a very good question. I'm not convinced that I would, because I've had this going for a very long time. I wrote about Pantheon in Planet Souls. No, in After the City, right? Yeah, I think so. And at that time, I had only seen Pantheon in 1962, when I, as a young man, came to Rome. So I just took that text and kind of, when I now could live without ground Pantheon, it kind of revised itself. Because this problem that I had in trying to understand the relationship between buildings and us is something that I began before my interest in urbanism. It's something that probably began when I was a very little kid. And it is the underlying kind of intellectual crux that I always return to, particularly in what I call the sort of art form. It's very hard, you know, the beavers are not very good. These drawings are actually quite nice. And I wish there were better ways of showing them, but that's the way they are. And it's really also, it's a return to craft for me. It's a return to attempting to bridge the gap between theory and practice, which has always interested me. So this was a kind of, the Pantheon has been there for a long time in my mind. It's a prime example of architecture's capabilities of producing terror. It has everything in it, and maybe that's why it's lasted for so long. That it is a kind of reminder of what architecture really is. Now we have all kinds of bubbles hanging on architecture, tops and domes, and the back, and we don't see it anymore because we wonder at the spatial, the capabilities of machines, not understanding that it's zeros and ones that does not belong. And as I said, these very nice students every day need time out. Need time out. I had time out in Rome. Your cell phone. Wonderful. We need time out all the time. We need to stop ourselves frequently. Sit down, reflect on what we are, what we're doing, what we're part of. That's why the obsession with form as the only thing that architects do is really problematic. It's wonderful. It is terrifically exciting to be in that formal enterprise. But we forget that we are a practical culture architects. We are, and that is used for all kinds of nefarious things in society. And we say, oh, it's just like sort of, these guys that invented that. Oh, I don't know. Just did it. You make your own music. We can't take that anymore. We have, we lost the suburbs. Fantastic opportunity for architects to make some real interesting impact on this culture. We totally lost it. We lost money in the process because those guys made a lot of money. And this is because of our arrogance. No, we don't deal with things like this. Housing is the key for architectural culture. It was the key for modernism. It's just that when Phil Johnson took them over the ocean, they forgot that political part. Turned it into custom-made housing for rich people. Problem. We are in deep funk. You were in deep funk, I'm not. I'm just watching you. Foolishness. Yes?
So you have the Pantheon as a sort of architecture of terror, and then you suggest objects that would kind of help people with the opposite, with sort of creating interactions, community, let's say. So do you have an example of an architecture of community then that you can give that maybe already exists?
No, you'd ask that question. I think it's dangerous to take anything that I do too literally. So there is a risk here. I don't really think that those devices will take you away from terror. I am still deeply claustrophobic, and I know how scary it is. And they're probably the only thing that will help my claustrophobia is drugs. Which is, after all, the new version of neuropsychology. So, having said that, however, I do think that making cracks in everything is really fundamental. If you think about the kind of sophistication that involved in Japanese culture, they would make a beautiful pot and they would drop it and put it together again. That sort of hint at, which I think maybe for a completely different reason are in this building, the fact that you can sneak away, you can escape, and you know, I saw 202 left leave in the corner of my eye and they could stick out. That to me is probably where these things lie. But also to build these things, like when we have, on the one hand, we have we in the mass, and the other hand, we have I in the self. We have lost something in between, which existed before I, like real deep friendships, where you would do things with your friends that you wouldn't otherwise do. We need those things in order to defy all the structures that apply to us, and that we willingly. I have never quite seen such a docile crowd as the young new students that we have around. I came out in the middle of the 60s. I was in two revolutions, one in Berkeley and one at Harvard. The one in Berkeley was much more interesting. The one at Harvard was very elite. And I went to MIT instead. It was a process. But the fact that I go and look at every studio, there everybody's sitting there in front of their damn computer. And I know that they are subjectified by this. The only people I think are liberated are the ones that are trying to write new programs, to try to use a screwdriver and not use a keyboard. I mean, all those revolutionaries, they're trying to kick this piece of machinery in order to make it more for us and less the other way around. Those are the ones that will break holes in these apparatuses in order to make, in fact, help us in our incessant need of liberation. Or are we incessant in need of liberation? I don't know. I am. I need it for my own well-being. So, maybe I'm assuming too much. So, it's not that I like to have book burnings I have in Nazi Germany, like computers crashing. That isn't bad to have a big, get one of those huge cars that you do in Dervis and drive across thousands of computers. Or burn software. Do something constructive about our own demise. This subjectification are very, 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 very insidious. And anything else?
Two, at the level of content and at the level of media, yes. One thing I'm interested in is what you think about what you could call the current fear-mongering of different crises that confront architecture. So,
lot of fear-mongering out there, producing phobias that we're supposed to address, which some of us think is becomes a burden to architecture that it shouldn't have to address. But then I'm also interested in your meeting when Alexander said, when will you go back? Or will you go back to Houston? I took to me, somehow you left that project for another project. But then when you think of the work altogether, it really is architecture as a kind of storytelling. And I'm wondering if storytelling is your way out, or the crack out of fear. Like, is that a model for an architect, and do you see it as a viable one? Is it one that's disappearing? It seems to be what ties all of the work together in a way. These scenarios and storyboards and scripts. And certainly there's a legacy of that in architecture. So it's the current crises and fear-mongering that's happened, and maybe your way out, which is sort of...
Well, you know, I don't pay much attention to that because I know enough about capitalism that it goes up and down. And I'm much more, you know, I believe in the other Marx, the one that believes that it will take a very long time before we will really have a fundamental change. We're going to have to live through capitalism, and that's what we're doing. And we do it very vicariously. What's going on, and it's not, you know, it's certainly not fun. It is terribly oppressive also. But so that's not so. I have the privilege of being in the university. I am interested in some sense, the architectural magic. I'm interested in the architecture's brain. How does it make itself? How does it work? And storytelling for me, you know, English is not my mother tongue. And Nabokov, the famous writer, and this is, I make what Aristotle said was the worst faux pas ever, is to associate yourself with great men. So I'm not as good as Nabokov. Nevertheless, he said, when it's not your mother tongue, the language becomes a tool. In other words, it's less oppressive in a way than it is when it's inert. So I spend as much time trying to write beautifully as I am interested in the message. Because I think that if I give up on that, it's sort of like giving up on aesthetics in architecture. You are taking something away from it that is absolutely fundamental for its life. So telling a good story is the architectural promenade, which when I discovered movement in architecture, there is a static fixed apparatus that you walk around, and then that liberty lied in that fact that I could run away. So the architectural promenade for me, that was of course this word that is fundamental for me, because it was a way out. So the architectural promenade, it's really what I'm involved in. I realized that this lecture doesn't really work as a lecture. This should be, you know, a movie or something. So maybe an opera would be much too. I just feel encumbered by the way to show this stuff. It's so old-fashioned. I'm drawing an A. A lot of absolutes, layers that is not shown here. But yes, it's, you know, the poetics of my enterprise is very important. It's not something that, oh, I'm a natural talent. No, I work really hard at it. And I have a very good editor that's giving me a lot of time to make it right. Yes?
Just to follow up on that notion of poetics, the lecture is an unusual lecture, and I'd be interested if you could contrast it with a lecture you might have given 10 or 20 years ago, and possibly even project what a lecture in the future might look like.
That's a question. I have a suspicion that I've given lectures like this a lot over the years, but not very often. You know, I became the urbanist and the dean, you know, another form of subjectification that's very hard to get out of. So I had to be responsible for my populace, and I had to work on a good lecture every year and all that. So I think that my work now is the return of the repressed. I repressed that, in a real Freudian sense, and it's now coming back with a vengeance. It's sort of like the type of rising in me. And who knows if I will ever be able to write anything urbanism again. My last book is going to come out. It's called 1 Million Acres and No Zoning. This is mad. Next Christmas at the AA. But I'm not convinced that I will ever write anything like that. I would probably just do this sort of stuff. I did have to find a better way of showing it, so I don't have to be feel terrible by myself. Yes.
It strikes me that the lecture is the ultimate subjectivity. And so, though on one hand you're talking about the subjectivity of the person looking at the computer screen, and this to me is so kind of idiosyncratic and personal to you, that I wonder what's the difference?
Oh, it's totally different. It's one of my graphics, yes. And it has nothing to do with what I mean by subjectivity. Subjectivity is sort of like this chair subjectifies me. It turned me into a sitting man. It tells me what to do. At the same time, it's being invented by us, so I was part of the making of it. But the subjectification is what it makes me do that I might not want it to do. That I'm autobiographical is a totally different thing. That has to do with me, Mr. Lerup. And subjectification is a different thing. It takes a little while to understand. You have to really believe that this stuff actually affects us. It tells us to do certain things. Inscribed in the chair is sitting. And when children crawl on chairs and turn them upside down, parents say, no, 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 you can't do that. And that, because they see a crack in it. They see the light of that chair. And therefore make use of it in a different way. That's what I mean by the defiant subjectification. It's really, the word is subjectification. And that's what the object makes it. The cell phone turns me into a person that's not here, but somewhere else. And it even, sorry, yeah.
If you replace all the images of the Pantheon with images of Crown Hall, would the lecture change? And if so, how?
Well, these are my ideas.
I'm not from there, I just work there.
My only defense is, we're sorry, what the heck is Crown Hall? What is Crown Hall?
Nice's Crown Hall.
Oh, please, I just what does that mean? Nice. No. Let's take the Stadtgalerie in Berlin, which is a building that I know well, which is totally exposed to the kibitzers outside. So if you do anything not good in the Staatsgalerie, you'll have one. So the visibility here is sort of, it's not as focused as in the Pantheon. It's now total. It is the revelation of an absolute, complete and disciplinary society where there are no secrets because everybody knows everything. It's like you look at soap operas on television and you think your whole life seems very benign in soap operas. They have invented everything that ever happened in domestic life and soap operas. So Mises' work is this very strange that there is no way of hiding anymore. That's how it would change. I would say that is the perfect description of a disciplinary society, where the disability is total. Last, everybody's so fond of glass. I like balls. Big balls. Yes.
The kind of thrust of the lecture seemed to lead up to your interest in introducing intercommunication, and then your model of that was just doubling the pantheon. So how does like just creating two of the same thing, slightly off center, produce your form of intercommunication?
Sure, I understand.
And you had a slide that said one of the things that we need to do or should have done or might not be done is intercommunication. And then you just have a slide of the pantheon times 2. So the same thing kind of talking with itself. So I'm trying to, I don't quite see what that produces. Like how is that intercommunicated instead of just louder?
I don't think I used the word intercommunicative. I said intersubjectivity, which is a different concept. Intersubjectivity is what's necessary to get teams to work together. In other words, you need to be able, like if you look at Machiavelli, he said,
But either way, if it's the same thing, where's the inter portion?
what is the same thing? What? I don't understand you, I'm sorry. Is there a particular image you were thinking about?
But it was one of your drawings. Where it was the pantheon, and then it's up again.
I mean, it's many ones. On the same drawing again?
Same drawing.
No, it was Pantheon and the Panopticon by Bentham.
No, not one of the sketches. It was one of the ones where you.
Well, you know, we're going to have to fight this out. I'm sorry if I was confused. I don't think I talked about intercommunication. I talked about intersubjectivity, which is a very specific subject. I'm sorry to be. Maybe it's time to go for a drink. Does anybody else have a question? Well, thank you very much.
Taking this whole thing to the state. Why didn't I just flip it the slides? Let's see what that was objectified. I owe you $1. What? I threw my lighter for that fee. What? Sure about that. Do I keep this lighter? I don't think you can go right next time I see you. Right here.